We continue now at the top of Daf Zayin Amud Aleph from Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 16a. And the previous summit, the Gemara was dealing with an apparent contradiction in the Mishnah, because at the beginning of the Mishnah, it sounds like it's talking about in the Chatzar HaNizik, in the courtyard of the Nizik, and it's saying that a Tam pays Chatzi Nezik, but then the Mishnah goes on to say that in the Chatzar HaNizik, it pays Nezik Shalom like Rabbi Tarfon. So it sounds like the beginning of the Mishnah is the Rabbanan, that it's Chatzi Nezik, and the end of the Mishnah is Rabbi Tarfon, that it's Nezik Shalom. And the Gemara now gives a second answer to the contradiction from Rav, that really cooler Rabbi Tarfon, the entire Mishnah is Rabbi Tarfon. Then the Reisha, the beginning of the Mishnah, is difficult. How do we understand the Reisha? Because Reisha b'chatzar hamiyuchedes lepeiros le'echad mehen v'lo zeh l'shvarim. The case of the Reisha is that it was a chatzar where only one of them, the nizik, was allowed to put his peiros, his fruits, but both of them were allowed to bring in their aksin. The lagabe shein havel chatzar hanizik. So in terms of shein, when the Mishnah was referring to the damage of shein of eating, so there it's eating the fruits. Only one of them was allowed to put in the fruits. So havel chatzar hanizik. As far as shein is concerned, it's considered the courtyard of the nizik, and that's why shein is going to pay in that situation, because it's the chatzar hanizik. Shein is normally patur and Rosh Hashanah. Well, the Gabe Karen have a Rosh Hashanah, but in terms of Karen, it's considered Rosh Hashanah because everyone's allowed to bring their oxen in there, and that's why it's Chatzi Nezek. By a time in Rosh Hashanah pays Chatzi Nezek. That's how we can explain the beginning of the Mishnah according to Rabbi Tarfon. But the Gemara continues. Amar Rav Kahana says, "Amrisa l'shmaita kamei Rav Zvid min Nahardoi." I said over the sugya in front of Rav Zvid from Nahardoi. V'Amar Li, and he said to me, "Mimotzis mukmis la kulak Rabbi Tarfon." Can you really say that the whole Mishnah is Rabbi Tarfon? Hakatani hashein muedes lechol es haroila. But it says in the Mishnah that by shein it's a muad if it eats something that the animal normally eats. So that sounds like it's saying roi lo in, shein roi lo lo. It sounds like only if it eats something normal, but if it eats something abnormal, it sounds like you're paying chatzi nezik, and we're talking about in the chatzar hanizik. V'ir Rabbi Tarfon ha'amar, but if it's Rabbi Tarfon, again Rabbi Tarfon holds mishuna karen b'chatzar hanizik nezik shalom mishalim, that a strange kind of damage of karen in the chatzar hanizik pays nezik shalom. So it's clear from that line in the Mishnah that it's actually chatzi nezik. So elo liolam rabbanan. So the Gemara says rather you have to say the whole Mishnah actually is the rabbanan. So then the difficult line is when the Mishnah seems to be saying explicitly like Rabbi Tarfon, it seems to be saying the chatzar hanizik is a muad that pays nezik shalom. How do you understand that line? The Gemara explains v'chisurei mechzor v'hachi katani. There are words missing in the Mishnah, and you should read it as follows: Chamisha tamim heim. There are 5 kinds of tam. V'im huadu. And if those animals, if they're muad, if they're warned, they do it repeatedly. Chamishasan muadim. Then all 5 of them become muad. V'shein v'regel muadin mitchilasan, and shein and regel, that's a muad from the outset, from the very beginning. V'heichan hadasan b'chatzar hanizik, and where do we find that they're considered a muad? That's only in the chatzar hanizik. That's how we can read the Mishnah, and it's not problematic. The Mishnah is not talking about tam b'chatzar hanizik. The Mishnah is talking about shein and regel b'chatzar hanizik. But the Gemara continues, Maskif lo Ravina. Ravina asks on this, Hakatani l'kamon. It says later on, Shor hamazik b'rashos hanizik ketzad, meaning the Mishnah later explains all these lines in the Mishnah and says, how do you have a situation of Shor hamazik b'rashos hanizik? How so? So if you say that case was in the Mishnah, because by doing the Chisurei Mechsera, we basically took that case out of the Mishnah. So if you say it's in the Mishnah, Misham Hachi Katani Ketzad, it would make sense later in the later Mishnah to say what exactly are the details of the case. But if you're now changing the whole Mishnah and saying we're not dealing with Shor Hamazik B'Rashos HaNizik, meaning Karen B'Rashos HaNizik, so my Ketzad, what's the Mishnah later on saying how so if we never even mentioned this case before? So Elam Ravina, rather Ravina says, Chisurei Mechsera, there are words missing, however, V'hachi Katani, however, this is the real way that you should read the Mishnah. Chamisha Tam Im Hein, there are 5 cases of Tam. V'im Huadu, and if the animals are warned, they do it repeatedly. Chamishasan Muadin, then they all become Muad, all 5 of them. V'shein V'regel Muadin Mitchilasan, again, Shein and Regel are Muad from the outset, from the very beginning. V'zehu Shor Hamud, and that's V'zehu Shor Hamud, and this is considered to be Shor Hamud, V'shor Hamazik B'Rashos HaNizik, and a shor that damages in the Rishos HaNizik, Machlokas Rabbi Tarfon v'Rabbanan, is a Machlokas Rabbi Tarfon and the Rabbanan. V'yesh Muadim Acherim Kayotze Ba'elu, and there are other cases that are always considered Muad, and they are as follows: Haza'ev, Ha'ari, V'Adov, V'Habardalis, V'Hanomer, V'Hanachash, the wolf and the lion, and the bear, and the bardalis, and the leopard, and the snake. And Rashi explains Ravina's reading of the Mishnah as follows: V'im huadu chamishasan muad, and again, if they're warned, they do it repeatedly, then all 5 of these cases are muad. Hainu perusha de chamisha muadim. What he's saying is, when it says there are 5 tams and 5 muads, that's the explanation. There are 5 tams, and all 5 of these cases, if they do it repeatedly, that's 5 muads. The Tanan b'mas nisan. That's what it means in the Mishnah when it says there are 5 muads. Then the Mishnah goes on and says v'shein v'regel muadin mitchilasan. Shein and regel are muad from the outset. Lava minyon nakoi. That's not part of the 5 anymore, according to this reading. Ela muadin katani v'azal. We're just saying the different kinds of muad. And then the Mishnah has a line, V'zeu shor hamuad, and this is a shor hamuad, meaning, Hada amron v'imhuadu chamishasan muadim. That which we said, that if they did it repeatedly, the 5 of them are muad, Zeu shor hamuad akosa b'parsha. That's the case of shor hamuad that's written in the parsha. And then the Mishnah goes on to say that shor hamazik b'rishus hanizik is a machlokis, Rabbi Tarfon v'Rabbanan, that's a machlokis between Rabbi Tarfon and the Rabbanan, Perek Sheni in the second Perek, v'ha'adam. And then you have the case of Adam. Again, man is considered to be a muad. And the Gemara continues and supports Ravina's understanding of the Mishnah. Tanya Nami Hachu, of a brisa that supports this. It says exactly Ravina's reading. Chamisha tamim hein. There are 5 tams. V'im huadu chamishas and muadin. And in all of those cases, if they do it repeatedly, the 5 of them become muad. V'shein v'regel muadin mitchilasan. And again, shein and regel, that's muad from the outset. V'zeu shor hamuad. And if you have an animal that becomes a muad, that's the shor hamuad in the parsha. V'shor hamazik b'rishus hanizik machlokes Rabbi Tarfon v'Rabbanan. And a shor the damages in the rishus hanizik, as we said, is a machlokes Rabbi Tarfon and the Rabbanan. There are other cases, other animals that are always muad. The wolf and the lion and the bear and the leopard and the bardalis and the snake. The Gemara says, some learn this exact same Gemara, but they set it up first as a contradiction. Tanan chamisha tamim v'chamisha muadim. It says there are 5 tams and 5 muads. V'suleka, there's no more than 5. What about all the cases you listed? The wolf and the lion and the bear and the leopard and the bardalis and the snake. And then we answer, Amar Ravina. Ravina says, there are words missing in the Mishnah, and learn it as follows. Chamisha tamim, there are 5 cases of tam. V'imhuadu chamishas and muadin. If they do it repeatedly, the 5 of them are muad. V'shein v'regel muad and mitchilasan, and shein v'regel are muad from the outset. V'zeu shor hamuad, and if they do it repeatedly, they're warned they do it repeatedly, that becomes a shor hamuad of the parsha. V'shor hamazik b'rishus hanizik machlokas Rabbi Tarfon v'Rabbanan, and the shor that damages in the rishus hanizik is a machlokas between Rabbi Tarfon and the Rabbanan. V'yesh muad and acherim kayotzi ba'elu, and there are other animals that are also muad. Hazei v'ari hadov v'anamer v'bardalis v'anachash, the wolf and the lion and the bear and the leopard and the bardalis and the snake. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots, v'lo lirbots, if an animal crouches upon things and breaks them, that's also considered to be a situation of a strange kind of damage that's considered to be a tam. Amar Rabbi Elazar says, lo shanu ala pachin gedolim, that's only true if it's large vessels that are broken, so then you pay chatzi nezek. Avol pachin ketanim orchehu, but if it's smaller vessels, that's a normal thing to break, and in that case you would pay the full damage. And the Gemara says, lema Messiah, let's say the following brisa supports Rabbi Elazar, ha-behema muedas lahalech kedarka, behema is a muad to walk in its normal way, and it's going to break and it's going to crush people and animals and vessels. That's a normal thing. So you see over here, it's normal. That must be talking about pachin katanim. The Gemara says it's not necessarily a proof. Dilma min atzad. Maybe over here it's talking about it breaks it from the side, meaning to say it rubs against it. Let's say something close to the wall and it breaks something along the wall. So that might not be exactly the same as crouching upon it. Ika Diamri, there are those that have the version as follows. Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Lo tema, pachin gedolim hu delav orchei. Don't say that large vessels, which is not normal, avol pachin katanim orcheyu, but by smaller vessels it is normal. No, ela fila pachin katanim nami lav orcheyu. Even smaller vessels is not a normal kind of damage. It's only going to pay half. And according to this version, Meisvei, we have a question from the Brisa. It says it is normal for it to damage the person and the animals and the vessels. Rabbi Elazar says, Dilma min atzad. Maybe this Brisa is talking again where it brushes against it from the side. Some have another version where they set it up as a contradiction at first. Tanan velo lirbots, it says in our Mishnah that to crouch upon it is considered to be a strange kind of damage. But the Brisa seems to say the opposite, that if it's damaging the person or the animal or the vessels, that is a normal kind of damage. Rabbi Elazar says, Lo kash, it's not difficult. Kan bepachin gedolim. In one case we're talking about pachin gedolim, that's not normal. Kan bepachin katanim. In the other case we're talking about smaller vessels. In that case it is going to be considered normal. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Hazeiva ari v'chulu, and it went on to say the bardalis. And the Gemara says, my bardalis, what animal is the bardalis? Amar Rav Yehuda nifriza. Rav Yehuda says it's an animal called the nifriza. My nifriza, what is the nifriza? Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says appa, it's an animal called the appa. There's different translations. We will translate it as a hyena. Meisvei, we ask the following question. Rabbi Meir Omer af hatzavua. Rabbi Meir says even the tzavua. Now the tzavua is also a hyena, as we will see. Rabbi Elazar Omer af hanachash. Rabbi Elazar says even the snake snake is considered a muad. V'yamar Rav Yosef, tzavua zu appa, and Rav Yosef says that tzavua is the appa, that tzavua is the hyena. Now that wouldn't make any sense, because if you're saying the bardalis, and then Rabbi Meir is saying even the tzavua, what do you mean even? It's the exact same animal we just said above. And the Gemara says, Lokash, it's not difficult. Kan b'tzavua zachar, kan b'tzavua nekeva. In one case, we're talking about the male hyena, and the other case, we're talking about the female one. The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, tzavua zachar, when it comes to the male hyena, la'achar sheva shanim nasa atalef, after 7 years, it turns into a bat. Atalef la'achar sheva shanim nasa arpad. The atalef, after 7 years, turns into an arpad, which is another kind of bat. Arpad la'achar zayin shanim nasa kimosh. The arpad, after 7 years, turns into a kimosh, which is a kind of a thistle or a thorn. Kimosh la'achar sheva shanim nasa choach. A kimosh, after 7 years, turns into a choach, another kind of thistle. Choach la'achar sheva shanim nasa shade. And the choach, after 7 years, it turns into a shade. It turns into a demon. And Rashi explains, we're going to go with the second version of Rashi, Lishna Achrina V'ikr, who the real understanding is as follows: Masnisin b'tzavua nekeva. Our Mishnah, when it talks about the hyena, it's talking about the female. For Rabbi Meir Mosif tzavua zachar, and Rabbi Meir is adding on even the male one. Utarvayu mikri afa, they're both called afa. The Tanya tzavua zachar v'chulu, like it says tzavua zachar umishum d'mishtana l'bri acher. Since the male turns into other species, itzrich lo sofe behedu. We want to add that explicitly. Mipimori, Rashi says, this I heard from my master, my Rebbe, Velishna Achrina Shamati. The earlier version, which we did not read, says Rashi, I heard, but he says that is not the Iker version. In any case, that's the explanation over here, that the male is being added on. The female is in the Mishnah, and the male is being added on by Rebbe Meir. And the Gemara continues, Shidro Shel Adam, once we're talking about things that turn into other things, the spine of a person, Lachar Sheva Shonim, after 7 years, Nase Nachash, that turns into a snake. V'hani Mili Delo Kara B'modim, it only turns into a snake. That's only true if the person doesn't bow at Modim. Amar Mar, the master said, Rabbi Meir Omer Afat Savua. Rabbi Meir says, even the hyena is considered to be a muad, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tes Zayin Amud Beis.